No one expected the scene that awaited Ethan Lancaster the moment he entered the opulent dining room. Crystal chandeliers scattered fractured light across the polished mahogany table, highlighting the gilded silverware and delicate floral arrangements. Guests murmured, glasses clinked, but all eyes gravitated toward him. They had heard the rumors. The billionaire's son, they said, was broken, useless, and living off scraps. Tonight, they intended to prove it. Victoria Grant, seated at the far end of the table, perched like a hawk on her chair. Her perfectly arched eyebrows lifted in amusement as she leaned toward Max, her boyfriend, who smirked with overconfidence. "Watch this," she whispered, tapping her long manicured nails on the crystal rim of her glass. The air vibrated with tension. No one suspected that the boy they mocked had been preparing for this exact moment for years. Ethan moved gracefully to his seat, taking it as if the room belonged to him. Not because of wealth, but because of quiet confidence. Sophia Lane, sitting beside him, recognized the silent fire in his eyes. She had seen the countless nights Ethan spent building his quiet empire, while society dismissed him as a spoiled, fragile heir. Her subtle nod reassured him. They shared a secret no one else understood. As the first course was served, Chef Antonio, a charismatic man in his 40s, moved with subtle precision, placing plates with almost imperceptible signals toward Ethan. He had known the Lancasters for years and understood the truth behind Ethan's calm demeanor. The room's laughter echoed around them, oblivious to the game quietly unfolding beneath the surface. Victoria, feeling emboldened, raised her glass slightly. "To Ethan," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "May he learn humility before he embarrasses himself further." The guests erupted in laughter. Ethan's lips curved into a polite smile, but inside, he felt a cold determination. Every insult, every laugh, was a brick in the foundation of the surprise that would soon shatter the illusion of his weakness. Max, oblivious to Ethan's hidden confidence, leaned back in his chair, chuckling. "I never thought I'd see someone from that family struggle so obviously," he said, glancing around as if to invite agreement. He had no idea that Ethan's apparent vulnerability was a mask, a strategic illusion crafted over years of patience and silent investment. The waiter moved with fluid precision, refilling glasses and bringing plates, while Sophia kept a discreet eye on every guest's reaction. She could see the tension thickening, the way subtle glances and whispered comments betrayed their fear of being outsmarted. Yet no one realized that Ethan had already quietly gained leverage over several guests in unexpected ways, investments they had overlooked, businesses they had underestimated. Then came the hush. Ethan's gaze swept across the room, pausing on Victoria. For a moment, the socialite felt a flicker of unease, but she quickly brushed it off. What no one in that room understood was that humility and patience often mask the sharpest minds. Ethan's calm exterior was not weakness, it was preparation. And with that, the first moves in a silent, dramatic game had begun. The mocking, the laughter, the condescension, they would all play into a revelation that no one would see coming tonight. Ethan Lancaster was ready. The night had only just begun. Victoria's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. "So, Ethan," she said, leaning forward with a predatory smirk, "do you really live off your father's allowance, or is this poverty entirely your own fault?" Laughter erupted around the table. Crystal glasses rattled as Max guffawed, and the other guests joined in, some leaning forward to mock, some whispering cruel comments. Ethan's smile didn't falter. Inside, a slow, calculating fire burned. He had endured this his whole life, the ridicule, the assumptions, the condescending smiles. Tonight, he would let patience speak louder than rage. Ethan's fingers tapped lightly against the polished table, in rhythm with the laughter. But he wasn't counting beats, he was counting opportunities. Every insult was a chance to observe, analyze, and prepare his response. Sophia, sitting quietly beside him, leaned in just enough to whisper, "Ignore them for now. Watch. Wait." Her voice was almost lost under the din, but it grounded him, reminding him that some battles are won not with immediate confrontation but with strategy. The first course arrived, and Chef Antonio glided past the table, carrying plates of lobster bisque. His eyes briefly met Ethan's with a subtle nod, almost imperceptible to the rest of the room. The chef had known Ethan since childhood and had always admired the young man's composure. Tonight, he would play his part quietly, a silent ally among the oblivious elite. Victoria, sensing she had momentum, decided to escalate. "I hope your father taught you more than how to look good in a suit," she sneered. "Because otherwise, I don't see how you'll survive in this world." Max clapped mockingly, echoing her venom. The guests leaned forward, eager to watch the son of a billionaire squirm under the weight of humiliation. Ethan finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "I've survived quite well, actually. But thank you for your concern." The simplicity of his words struck harder than any insult. Laughter faltered for a fraction of a second. It was the first crack in the armor Victoria and Max had assumed was their target. Sophia's eyes sparkled with pride as she watched Ethan's subtle maneuvering. He wasn't just defending himself, he was planting seeds, quietly destabilizing the arrogance around the table. Every eye that had dismissed him now had to reconsider the quiet intelligence they had overlooked. Then came a critical move. Ethan tapped his watch under the table. No one noticed, but a discreet vibration signaled Chef Antonio to subtly adjust the presentation. It was a small act, almost invisible, but it marked the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan. Every dish, every gesture, would now carry an unspoken message. Appearances can be deceiving, and power can be hidden behind humility. Victoria, undeterred, attempted to recover her dominance. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "You must be used to being invisible," she said, her voice laced with venom. "The world doesn't care about someone who sits quietly while others build their legacies." The room erupted in laughter once again, but this time it carried an edge of tension. Something about Ethan's calm made the laughter uneasy. Ethan glanced briefly at Sophia, who gave a small nod. It was all set. Patience had done its work. The mocking, the laughter, the condescension, all of it had built the perfect stage for what would come next. No one in that room realized that the son they mocked so mercilessly held the keys to a revelation that would upend the entire evening. And as dessert menus were quietly handed out, the first strikes in Ethan's silent counterattack were about to begin. The guests believed they controlled the narrative, but in reality, they were walking into a carefully constructed trap. Tonight, the laughter would become regret, and the illusion of power would crumble. Sophia leaned just slightly toward Ethan, her voice a soft thread of sound that only he could hear. "They think they know you, but they don't know anything," she whispered. Her words were more than encouragement. They were a reminder that the night's cruelty was a trap for the arrogant. Ethan's eyes flicked across the table, taking in the smirks, the laughter, the subtle undercurrents of disdain. Each gesture, each whispered insult, was a note in a symphony he had been silently composing for years. Victoria, noticing the slight exchange, misinterpreted it as a nervous alliance. She leaned back, smirk widening. "See, he's scared even of his own friends," she whispered to Max. Her overconfidence radiated through the room, and the other guests, eager to join in, laughed again. But the moment of misunderstanding only played into Ethan's hands. The more they assumed weakness, the closer they came to the unveiling they would regret. Ethan's fingers lightly traced the rim of his glass as he absorbed every sound, every glance. This was more than a dinner. It was a stage for observation, a battlefield of subtle power. Each guest believed they held the upper hand, yet every gesture, every smirk was catalogued. Patience, he knew, was a weapon more powerful than anger. Sophia's small smile told him she understood. This was the moment when the silent strategy would begin to unfold. Victoria attempted another jab, loud enough for the table to hear. "You know, some people pretend to be humble because they're scared to fail. Others just fail anyway." The words landed like stones in a pond, rippling with judgment. Ethan's lips curved subtly into a knowing smile. The first cracks were beginning to appear. The arrogance that filled the room made them blind to the storm quietly brewing. Sophia's hand lightly brushed Ethan's arm, a silent signal. "Patience," she murmured. The world outside their table had no idea what was coming. Cameras hidden among guests were recording everything, unaware that they were capturing the prelude to an unforgettable reversal. Ethan had spent months orchestrating these moves in silence, and tonight, the payoff would be cinematic. As the main course was cleared, Ethan's calm demeanor remained unshaken. Chef Antonio approached again, subtly repositioning plates and glasses with imperceptible signals. The guests didn't notice the coordination, but Ethan did. Every movement, every gesture of service, had been quietly calibrated to align with the surprise he had planned. They believed they controlled the evening, but in truth, it was already under his control. Victoria, growing impatient, leaned forward once more. "Tell me, Ethan," she said, voice dripping with disdain. "What have you done to make yourself relevant besides sit in your father's shadow?" The room tittered. Max chuckled loudly, certain of victory. But Ethan's mind worked in silence. Every word Victoria spoke feeding the narrative he would soon flip completely. Ethan finally responded, voice calm, measured, and quiet enough to force the room to lean in. I've done what most people here will never understand, quietly building, quietly investing, quietly giving. Some things are better seen through action than words. The room paused, a fraction of doubt breaking through the smirks. Victoria's eyes flickered, a rare moment of uncertainty. And just like that, the first seeds of suspense were planted. The mocking had begun to falter. The room, once filled with arrogance, began to feel the stirrings of unease. Ethan's patience, Sophia's subtle guidance, and Chef Antonio's silent coordination had aligned perfectly. The evening's drama was only beginning. No one in the room noticed Ethan's subtle movement under the table. His fingers brushed against a sleek, black device, his phone. A discreet vibration confirmed the message he had been waiting for. Now, months of careful planning, silent investments, and unspoken strategies were about to come to fruition. While the guests believed they controlled the evening, in reality, Ethan held the leverage. Chef Antonio, sensing the signal, shifted trays and plates with near imperceptible precision. Every dish, every move in the room was about to carry a hidden message. The elite guests, completely unaware, continued to mock and whisper, thinking they were in control. But Ethan's calm had always been a mask, a carefully constructed illusion of vulnerability. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her smirk growing, believing she had won. I hope you're ready for a world that doesn't coddle you, she said, eyes glittering with cruel delight. Max nodded, laughing, entirely convinced that the night's entertainment would continue at Ethan's expense. Little did they know that their arrogance had set them squarely in Ethan's trap. Ethan's lips curved into a quiet smile as he observed the room. Each insult, each mocking gesture, had given him insight into the weaknesses of the elite gathered here. Names, businesses, investments, everything whispered in the wrong confidence was now information he could use. The poor boy they laughed at had quietly been amassing power they could never imagine. Sophia, sitting beside him, noticed the shift. She had watched Ethan endure endless humiliation and knew he had the intellect and patience to turn the night into a revelation. Her slight nod confirmed that the timing was perfect. Ethan's silence had been preparation. Now, the hidden advantage would begin to manifest. The room's atmosphere was deceptive, laughter mingled with arrogance, while under the surface, tension thickened like fog. Ethan's calm presence, his composed demeanor, hid the fact that he had quietly orchestrated connections with the very people mocking him. Investments, partnerships, and discreet influence, all tied back to him. Victoria attempted to regain her dominance, leaning forward and raising her glass mockingly. You really think you belong here? She challenged. But Ethan's eyes never wavered. Calmly, he replied, belonging is not about what you show, it's about what you quietly build. The room paused, the first seeds of doubt planting themselves in the minds of the once confident elite. Then came the silent shift. Ethan's fingers pressed a small button on his watch under the table, and a discreet notification reached the chef, signaling a final, subtle alignment of the dining experience. Plates shifted, glasses moved, every visual cue silently reinforcing that tonight, the narrative would flip. By now, the elite had no idea the evening had already begun to unravel. They thought their mockery was unchecked, their social dominance unquestioned. Ethan, quietly observing, knew that appearances were the greatest illusion of all. And in that illusion, he held the ultimate advantage. The dessert arrived quietly, unassuming, yet it carried the power to change everything. A golden chocolate dome sat before each guest, shimmering under the warm chandelier light. Ethan's hand moved with deliberate precision, tapping a hidden button on his watch. Suddenly, a projection lit up the wall, casting sharp visuals across the opulent dining room. Charts, screenshots, and images revealed investments, philanthropic work, and business acquisitions linked directly to Ethan. Gasps rippled through the room. Victoria's smirk froze, her confidence crumbling. Max's jaw dropped, the laughter caught somewhere in his throat. The people who had mocked him believed they had power, but in an instant, the illusion shattered. Ethan Lancaster, whom they had labeled poor and broken, had quietly amassed a fortune and influence far beyond their understanding. Sophia leaned back, subtle pride in her eyes. She had watched this man endure humiliation for years, and now the room would bear witness to the truth. Ethan's silence had been his shield, his patience a strategy. Each mocked gesture and whispered insult now reflected back on the arrogant guests who had underestimated him. The projection continued, revealing screenshots of companies rescued under Ethan's guidance, charities anonymously funded, and startups transformed into global powerhouses. Each image, each chart, added layers to the revelation. The man they had laughed at had been quietly shaping a kingdom under their very noses. Victoria's voice cracked as she tried to regain composure. This can't be real," she stammered. Max fumbled with his silverware, utterly powerless. The room had been designed for mockery, yet in a single, calculated moment, Ethan had taken control. The laughter had died. Shock had replaced arrogance. Ethan rose slightly from his chair, projecting calm authority. "All your laughter, all your assumptions, were aimed at someone you didn't understand," he said, voice measured but firm. "Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the loudest power." His words hit like a silent storm, resonating across the dining room. Sophia's eyes glimmered as she witnessed the shift. What had started as humiliation had turned into revelation. The social elite, once confident in their superiority, now realized that they had been blind. Every smirk, every laugh, every dismissive comment had contributed to the perfect storm Ethan had orchestrated. Even the servers felt the change. Chef Antonio, poised and knowing, moved among the guests, subtly signaling each table. The projections, the desserts, the precise timing. Everything had been planned meticulously to make the reveal undeniable. The dinner had transformed from a display of social power into a theater of truth. And then came the final, undeniable proof. A series of images showing philanthropic projects funded anonymously by Ethan, communities transformed, lives changed. The room's energy shifted from shock to awe. Victoria's face turned pale. Max's arrogance evaporated into thin air. They had mocked a man they thought weak. But now the true scale of his influence was undeniable. By the end of the dessert course, the room was silent. Not a single laugh remained. Every smirk, every arrogant glance had been replaced by realization. Ethan's poverty had been a mask. His power, hidden but absolute, had now been revealed. And the people who had mocked him were left with only one emotion: regret. Victoria tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out sharp and hollow, a forced echo that only highlighted her panic. This must be some kind of joke," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Max fumbled beside her, clutching his glass as if it could save him from the humiliation unfolding. Ethan, calm and composed, leaned slightly forward, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "Check your assumptions, Victoria," Ethan said, his voice smooth but commanding. "You mocked what you didn't know." The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Every guest understood that the mocking of the billionaire's son had ended, not with laughter, but with their own silent, inescapable embarrassment. Hidden cameras and phones began to capture every expression. The elite who had gathered to enjoy a spectacle of humiliation were now the spectacle themselves. Whispers became murmurs, murmurs became shocked exclamations. For once, the room's arrogance was replaced by vulnerability. Sophia's eyes glimmered with quiet pride. She had known this moment would come. The years of watching Ethan endure insults, of seeing him underestimated at every turn, were culminating in a moment that would be remembered long after the night ended. And Ethan's gaze, steady and unyielding, projected the message. Those who mock others often build their own humiliation. Victoria's face turned red, then pale, as she realized that every smug comment she had made now reflected back on her. Max's arrogance evaporated entirely. They had thought they controlled the narrative, but it had slipped through their fingers like sand. Ethan's calm patience had become a weapon, slicing through their illusions of superiority. Ethan rose slightly from his chair, commanding attention without raising his voice. "You assumed laughter could diminish me. You assumed arrogance could intimidate me. Tonight, you are witnessing the truth. Humility is not weakness, and patience is not powerlessness." The words hit like lightning, silent but unmistakable. Even the staff felt the shift. Chef Antonio moved with perfect timing, delivering the final course in a way that emphasized Ethan's composed dominance. Every movement was a silent reinforcement that control had shifted. The room, once filled with mocking voices, was now dominated by awe and disbelief. By now, the dinner had transformed from a social spectacle into a theater of accountability. Cameras hidden in the room, as well as phones discreetly filming, began capturing a moment that would go viral within hours. The mocking elite, once confident in their superiority, had become characters in Ethan's meticulously crafted narrative of reversal. Victoria attempted to speak, to reclaim her dignity, but Ethan's eyes silenced her effortlessly. "I think the night has already spoken for itself," he said, sitting back, calm and unyielding. The room understood. The mocked had become the master, and the arrogant the humbled. The room fell silent. The elite, once smug and arrogant, now sat frozen under the weight of realization. Max glanced at Victoria, searching for guidance, but she had none. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by the uneasy awareness that they had been played. Ethan's calm gaze swept across the table, pausing briefly on each face. Every smirk, every whisper, every mocking glance had contributed to the moment they would never forget. Sophia leaned in just enough to whisper, "Now watch closely." Ethan had already initiated the next phase of the evening. A subtle notification sent from his watch prompted the projection screen to shift, revealing detailed profiles and messages exchanged between the guests, proof of hidden schemes, bribes, and social manipulations meant to elevate themselves at the expense of others. Victoria's face turned crimson. This is impossible," she stammered, the confidence she had worn like armor now gone. Max's hands shook slightly as he tried to maintain composure. Every hidden conversation, every secret plan exposed, left them stripped of their arrogance. The room was no longer filled with power. It was filled with vulnerability. Ethan's voice cut through the tense hum. "You thought you were untouchable. You believed mockery and wealth were your shields. But truth, transparency, and quiet diligence reveal all." Each word resonated in the room, a quiet hammer that shattered assumptions. No laughter returned. The air was thick with realization. Sophia's subtle smile mirrored Ethan's satisfaction. She had watched him endure years of humiliation, ridicule, and dismissal. Now, every insult they had thrown at him bounced back, amplified by the revelations. The people who had believed themselves superior were now confessing silently to their envy, their arrogance, and their mistakes. One by one, guests began murmuring to each other, voices low and hesitant. I didn't know. This changes everything. How did he?" Every confession, subtle or direct, reinforced the realization. They had underestimated Ethan Lancaster at their peril. Their social superiority was a facade, now crumbling before their eyes. Victoria tried one last attempt at control, her voice shaky. You can't possibly know everything." Ethan's faint smile deepened. "I don't need to know everything," he replied smoothly. "I only needed to observe and wait. That is the power of patience." The statement silenced the room entirely. Sophia leaned closer, whispering softly, "It's over. The night belongs to him now." Ethan nodded subtly. The confessions, the exposure, the silent realization, they had all been pieces of a puzzle meticulously constructed for this evening. The elite had played their part unknowingly, fueling the revelation that would forever mark this dinner in social memory. By the end of the evening, the confessions had become undeniable. Every mockery, every dismissive comment, every assumption about the poor, broken son had been dismantled. Ethan's quiet endurance, his strategic patience, and his hidden influence had transformed humiliation into revelation. The dinner, meant to humiliate him, had become a testament to his unseen power. The room was silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan rose slowly, his movements deliberate, commanding attention without needing to shout. "There's one last truth you need to see," he said, voice calm, precise, yet carrying an undeniable weight. Every guest leaned forward, their curiosity battling unease. Tonight, the son they mocked would finish what the projections and confessions had started. A discreet tap on his watch triggered a final projection. Images of global companies, philanthropic foundations, and high-level board meetings filled the wall. Then, with one swipe, the projection revealed bank statements, contracts, and ownership documents. Ethan Lancaster was not just wealthy. He was the controlling force behind companies the guests assumed they knew. Every mocking remark they had made echoed back on them as they realized. The poor and broken son was the architect of empires they had underestimated. Gasps erupted. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. "No, this isn't possible." Max staggered in his chair, disbelief etched on his face. The projection left nothing ambiguous. Every claim of weakness they had thrown at him was obliterated by the evidence of his power. The very people who had laughed at him were now silenced, exposed not only to truth but to their own folly. Sophia, watching closely, allowed herself a small, proud smile. She had seen the years of endurance, the patience, and the quiet preparation culminate in this moment. Ethan's calm exterior had masked the truth. Every insult, every slight, had been carefully recorded, observed, and repurposed for tonight's revelation. Ethan's voice carried through the room, steady and commanding. You mocked me for being poor, dismissed me as broken, and assumed I would remain invisible. Yet here I stand, not only visible but dominant. You laughed while I prepared. You underestimated the quiet patience of someone who works while others play. The words landed like thunder, heavy and undeniable. He paused, letting the silence deepen the impact. Then, with a subtle gesture toward the projection, he revealed the final bombshell. Personal accounts, charitable endowments, and private partnerships showing that he had anonymously transformed the lives of thousands, including some of the very people in the room. The dinner, meant to humiliate him, had become a testament to his power, influence, and foresight. Victoria's voice cracked. You were behind all of this?" she whispered, disbelief consuming her. Max's face twisted, caught between anger and shame. The room's laughter had been replaced with stunned silence, a room full of elite socialites confronted by a power they had ignored and ridiculed for years. Ethan finally sat, calm and unyielding, his eyes sweeping the room one last time. "Humiliation has a price," he said softly. "Tonight, you paid it not with money, but with pride." The words resonated, leaving an undeniable mark on every guest. The mocked son had become the master, the arrogant elite the humbled. Sophia's subtle nod acknowledged the triumph. They had endured the ridicule together, and now the room was transformed. Ethan's power was no longer a secret. Every gesture, every word, every projection had revealed a man the world had underestimated, and they would never forget it. By the next morning, the story of Ethan Lancaster's quiet dominance had gone viral. Social media feeds exploded with screenshots from the dinner, videos of shocked guests, and the projection revealing his influence. The son they had mocked had not only survived humiliation, he had become the symbol of patience, strategy, and understated power. Victoria and Max were humiliated beyond repair. Their texts and calls were flooded with ridicule from peers and followers alike. Invitations to events were rescinded, and private messages from other elites betrayed astonishment, envy, and shame. The social hierarchy they had relied on had been irreversibly shaken. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from business leaders, philanthropists, and old friends who had always believed in his quiet genius. While the elite mocked him, he had quietly built an empire, and the world now had undeniable proof. Every insult thrown at him became a testament to their own arrogance. Sophia, ever observant, noted the shift in public perception. "The world loves a comeback story," she said, her voice barely audible over the news clips. "And you didn't just come back, you rewrote the narrative entirely." Ethan nodded, knowing the influence of perception was as powerful as wealth itself. The elite who had humiliated him were now subjects of commentary and judgment. Memes, news articles, and social posts dissected their arrogance, mocking their misjudgment and social blindness. The dinner had transformed into a defining moment of social reckoning, leaving Ethan as the architect of a narrative no one could ignore. Victoria attempted damage control, but every public statement she made only fueled ridicule. Max tried to explain, but his credibility was gone. The social consequences of their arrogance were amplified online, demonstrating that pride and mockery often carry a heavy price. Ethan's influence, once hidden, was now celebrated. Investors reached out, media outlets requested interviews, and social leaders recognized his strategic brilliance. The son they mocked had quietly built a network of power that was now undeniable, leaving a lasting impression on both the elite and the public. Sophia watched him from the side, proud and quietly satisfied. Years of observing, supporting, and strategizing had culminated in this moment. The world now recognized the truth. Patience, intelligence, and subtle action often triumph over arrogance and superficial judgment. By evening, the story had cemented itself as a viral sensation. Online discussions, news articles, and social feeds all reinforced a single truth. Ethan Lancaster, once mocked as poor and broken, had emerged victorious, leaving the arrogant elite to grapple with the consequences of their mockery. Months had passed since that fateful dinner, but the story of Ethan Lancaster's triumph lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it, both in person and online. Victoria and Max had faded from the social spotlight, their arrogance replaced by caution and embarrassment. The world now remembered not their mockery, but Ethan's quiet strength and strategic brilliance. Ethan had transformed the humiliation into a teaching moment, both publicly and privately. He spoke at conferences, mentored young entrepreneurs, and quietly funded initiatives that lifted entire communities. His influence was no longer just financial, It was cultural, social, and emotional. The poor, broken son had become a symbol of perseverance, patience, and the power of unseen work. Sophia stood beside him at a charity gala, her eyes gleaming with pride. "You didn't just win," she whispered. "You changed the narrative for everyone watching." Ethan smiled subtly, knowing that the real victory was not revenge. It was transformation. The lesson extended beyond the dining room, reaching a world hungry for proof that humility, strategy, and patience could overcome arrogance. Victoria and Max, once the epitome of social dominance, attempted to re-enter circles they had once ruled. But whispers followed them wherever they went. Tales of a night where arrogance was humbled, a son once mocked who had quietly built empires while they underestimated him. Their influence waned, Ethan's legacy grew. Ethan's empire expanded, but not recklessly. Every acquisition, every project was guided by ethics, strategy, and foresight. The man who had endured mockery had learned that power wielded quietly, with patience and intelligence, leaves a far more lasting impression than arrogance ever could. Sophia reflected on the journey they had shared. The dinner, once meant to belittle, had become a masterclass in strategy, patience, and emotional resilience. It was a story that would be told for years, not just for the shock and drama, but for the moral clarity. Those underestimated are often the ones quietly shaping the world. The public celebrated Ethan not only for his wealth, but for his quiet wisdom. Social media feeds, documentaries, and viral stories painted him as a figure of resilience, patience, and intelligence. The lesson was clear. Never mock what you cannot see, never judge what you do not understand, and never underestimate the quiet power of determination. In the final reflection, Ethan sat with Sophia in a quiet room overlooking the city lights. "It wasn't just about proving them wrong," he said softly. "It was about proving to ourselves what patience and strategy can achieve." Sophia nodded, understanding that this victory was far deeper than social revenge. It was the foundation of a lasting legacy that would inspire generations. Have you ever underestimated someone who quietly prepared their triumph? Comment if Ethan's story inspires you to be patient, strategic, and unstoppable.